What's going on, everybody? I'm back with another video. This video is going to be looking at the match between West Ham and Tottenham in the EFL Cup quarterfinal. And before we get into the tactics behind the match, be sure to check out both my books. They're online on Amazon and there's links in the descriptions below. Also be sure to check out Keyframe. There's a link to that. It's how I made this video. And let's get right into the tactics behind the match. So West Ham went with a back five, so a little bit of a change from their 4-2-3-1, which is how they usually played. They still went with a double pivot though with Declan Rice and Souček, but their initial build-up had some tendencies that remained the same, but the back three in their first line of build-up was different, but they definitely use some variability in their double pivot, having Declan Rice still play through the left half space for the majority of the game. That remained constant, as well as some of their interactions from their more attacking players. For Tottenham, we saw them play also in a 5-2-3, which then in the second half became a 5-3-2. So to start the game, they had their double pivot, which would then match up quite nicely against the first two lines of build-up from West Ham. West Ham would often look to progress via the half space or the wide area, which might have been one of the reasons they prompted the switch to a 5-3-2, which would give Tottenham more compactness when they would shift into wider areas to then maintain control over a central position. So as we take another look, we can see the double pivot of Tottenham become very stretched when West Ham would play into wide areas, because the front three of Tottenham would then become very oriented to the back three of West Ham. This would lead to very inefficient positioning and allow for space to be created for West Ham in potentially dangerous positions, especially higher up the field. So as we see here, we have the West Ham build up, Declan Rice fading into the wide area, the left hand side, which he usually does. So this allows him to use his range of passing, pull the double pivot apart of the Tottenham team, and this then creates space in central areas for then West Ham to progress and look to play through. This also gives the defenders problems for West Ham, as we see Sanchez jumping, but Dyer is pinned, so it creates a bit of a dilemma because Lanzini drops too far deep, forcing Sanchez to either commit to man orientation or maintain his zonal principles, which then creates this opportunity for West Ham to either play in behind or play between the lines. West Ham also had a bit of asymmetry on the right hand side when they were building from the back, using their back three to then span or overshift to the right hand side, forcing Tottenham to take up an asymmetric defensive shape. So as we see, Tottenham still very much in their 5-2-3 at this point through the match, but the tactical change and the variability from West Ham forces their midfield forward to then look more like a 5-3-2, which then they change early on in the second half around the 50th minute. So this might be when they have changed their tactical setup, but it came due to the asymmetry of West Ham's back three and how they occupied their first line of build-up, which would then almost create a natural overload and isolate. But with this, Harry Kane's cover shadow was typically tried to use to block Declan Rice, which often gave the potential for Declan Rice to be the free player in the platform position. Now, after Tottenham made some substitutions, they went with a clear 5-3-2 that gave them more control over the pivot area and forced West Ham to commit more players to their first line of build-up and to the wider positions. So it gave West Ham a little bit less efficiency in terms of breaking down Tottenham's defense and manipulating their defensive structure to create space in dangerous areas. So it made Tottenham's defense more robust and forced more players to the outside positions of Tottenham's defensive block. It also forced Tottenham to then vacate the pivot area a lot of times between Souček and Declan Rice, dropping deeper or wider, allowing then players like Fornals or Lanzini to drop into this area to then receive the ball. When Tottenham were in possession in their first third of build-up, they built much like Chelsea would, with an asymmetry and an overload towards this right-hand side that would give them tighter passing connections than would be offered on this left-hand side, where it's very much underloaded. So the double pivot even shift across to maintain this compactness and overload, and often is used to disrupt the defensive patterns from West Ham and force West Ham to vacate one side altogether. So now we quite clearly see West Ham's for 5-2-3 with their double pivot and 3 front players matching up man for man against the first line of build up for Tottenham, and using spatial control principles like compactness and the use of their cover shadows to then block off access to the double pivot of Tottenham and force the ball into wide areas where it can then more easily be pressed from deeper areas with the use of West Ham's wingback coming from these deeper positions. When Tottenham would become dangerous was moments when they were able to get their single pivot on the ball in central positions, so this would then be created when one of their 2 central midfielders would move into a wider area, then creating the single pivot and allow him to become the free player between the first and second line of defense for West Ham. So in this area, the 2 midfielders would be pinned by Tottenham attacking midfielders, Bergwijn and Lucas Moura. The wide players would be oriented towards the wide center backs or be disrupted by the weak side holding midfielder, then leaving Højbjerg free with clear passing connections through from the half space into the central corridor, where then Højbjerg can exploit the man advantage and then go further forward up the field. So now in the last picture we see this quite clearly in how free the holding midfielder can get from Tottenham, and this is when they went with their 3-man midfield later on in the game in the second half now, with then Højbjerg going into wider areas, creating the midfield 3, which would also allow then Son, just off our screen here, drop into these central positions while Harry Kane then looks to pin defenders to then create a numerical overload and create numerical superiority through the midfield, as West Ham's front 3 were very much dragged forward and the double pivot were separated, then offering more space to the central midfielder of Tottenham. And that's where we're going to wrap up the analysis for today. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.